My name is Kamaron McNair. I'm a money reporter with CNBC Make It, and today I'm joined by Yanely Espinal, a Director of Education at Next Gen Personal Finance, and Kamaron Sperance, the Senior Hotels reporter at The Points Guy. Thank you for joining me here today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So we'll just dive right into the topic. When you're looking to plan a vacation, looking to book a vacation, what are some of the biggest costs? And if not, the kind of obvious things, what are the most surprising costs that people should be aware of?
Yeah, so I actually just took a really big trip for my 35th birthday. I spent the month of August in Japan and I went to 3 or 4 different cities, which was amazing. One of the things that popped up that I completely did not expect is things that you really don't plan for, right? Of course, we know the big things to plan for are your travel costs, right? Your flight, your accommodations, a food budget. Of course, if you're going to try new cuisines in a new country, you have to plan for food expenses. But there were a lot of issues with our transportation. And when I was in Japan, there was actually an earthquake in the southern part, in the southern islands, and then there was a tsunami warning after that. And so some of the trains that we were relying on taking were canceled and flights were not leaving. So we had to actually spend a little bit more than we budgeted on travel and expenses. So while you're looking at all of those big buckets of spending on a big trip, the usual things, also I would always recommend to add a little bit more for unexpected expenses that you might not have foreseen or couldn't really plan for ahead of the trip.
Definitely echo that. Last week I was in South Africa. Public transportation surprisingly really affordable there relative to taxis and Uber costs. Next week I'm going to LA. I was price shopping Ubers versus ultimately ended up making more sense to rent a car while there. So that one for sure is one that can easily creep up just as quickly as airfare and hotels.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely.
Great trips. And I think, important when we think about emergency fund for every day, we may not think about emergency fund for your vacation.
Right.
But it sounds like both of you are kind of recommending at least having some kind of buffer for those kinds of costs that creep up.
Definitely. I actually wouldn't even really call it an emergency fund. I would call it a sinking fund. And that just means that it's something that you're adding money to for an extended period of time. Because let's be real, when you want to plan a big dream vacation, like my trip to Japan for a month, I spent over $10,000 on that trip. It was the biggest, most expensive trip of my life. It was worth it for sure, but it took me a long time to save up for that. So I actually had to set up a sinking fund for my birthday dream vacation to Japan, and I was setting aside money for that. So I think you have to really think ahead when you're planning a big dream trip like this and ask yourself, how much is it going to cost? If it's going to take me 18 months to plan for it, or if it's going to take me a year, 12 months, then let me set up a sinking fund that's a piece of my budget every month, where every single month or every pay period, I'm going to take a certain amount of money and I'm going to keep adding it every month or every pay period until at the end of that duration of time, the total amount that I need, my $10,000 or my $15,000, is now accumulated over that 12-month period of time. So for me, an emergency savings fund, you're trying as quickly as you can to save up 6 months, 12 months of an emergency. In this case, you know exactly the amount that you're going to set aside for this trip. Hopefully you have a good ballpark idea, and then give yourself time to add it little by little so that it doesn't feel like all at once, but more bite-sized goals to reach that big number.
The other thing we also recommend people keep an eye on is when you're booking an all-inclusive vacation, these are increasingly popular, especially coming out of the pandemic. Check the fine print there, because sometimes all-inclusive doesn't include certain a la carte restaurants, experiences, food. If you're drinking alcohol, that also can kind of add up depending on the property as well. Same thing with cruises too. So just be mindful of what exactly you're buying when it's an all-inclusive experience or a cruise ship as well. And tack on some extra dollars just to have for the time of checkout.
Absolutely. Great tips. And I think you both are saying, it is best to plan ahead. Is it always best to plan, as far as you can, or is it okay to kind of track as you go as you are starting to build an itinerary for a trip?
Oof, that's a tricky one. I think it's going to be a little bit of a personal preference. I don't know if Cameron agrees with me, but I feel like everybody's a little different. With me, I kind of did half and half. I didn't set my exact budget to the dollar, to the penny. Like, I sort of knew I had a general amount that I wanted to set aside, and that I wanted to spend, that ballpark estimate. But one of the things that really shocked me was how annoying it is to, in another country with different currencies, to be doing the conversions. And sometimes, like, I would be in line to get food at like a street vendor, and there's a long line behind me, and I'm here just pulling out my conversion calculator to figure out the currency conversion. Am I going to still be within my budget? So, one of the things I'll say is, yes, plan generally, but understand understand that things are going to vary a little bit because of things like currency conversions. I actually beforehand, I downloaded an app called Wise, which is a platform that lets you hold money in the app with different currencies. And I think that was super helpful because it like helped me stick to my budget a little better instead of constantly pulling out the conversion calculator every time. But before the trip, if you're having a little bit of a tough time budgeting a certain amount, think of a ballpark estimate and look online to see what similar prices have been. And you might use an app like Rocket Money or something like that where it can help you cut subscription costs, cut things just to set aside a little more money for the things that you may not account for. But yeah, one of those big things that I think you might not notice is conversion fees or currency changing. So just keep that in mind, that it's not good to always do that like at the airport or even at your bank because of some of the extra fees or markups. So just, keeping an eye on those things, it might switch up a little bit the amount that you end up actually spending at the end of your trip.
And one of the things the points guy, we're obviously focusing more on like points and miles, award redemptions. It's kind of a barbell for us. A lot, if you're wanting like the most award availability to get like burn your points for a free flight, free hotel, 11 months is when you're going to see the most availability. And that's where a lot of us start to plan ahead in that regard. But also there are certain really kind of high value redemptions that don't come about until a couple of days before the flight. I know some people might panic at the idea of waiting to book their vacation just like 3 days out, but I have coworkers who really value Lufthansa first class, and especially if you're transferring from like one of the Star Alliance partners that Lufthansa's in, say United, Air Canada, Avianca. The first class redemptions on Lufthansa don't open up until like 2 or 3 days out. So if you really value that, if you really want to have that experience, you have to kind of wait until the very last minute and have the flight literally be the last thing you worry about before your vacation.
Oh, and that gives me heart palpitation just thinking about it.
A little bit
You and me
anxiety.
both. But I'm just saying, if you really want to fly Lufthansa first class on your dream vacation to Germany, have a little bit of, I guess, patience.
Yeah, well, you bring up a great point, Kamaron, and something that I was curious about, especially flights. We know that the price can fluctuate a lot in, over 6 months, over 12 months especially. Do you have recommendations on besides specific airlines and rewards, waiting to book or tracking flight prices, or should you book as far ahead, or is it better to, is the 3-month tricks that people say out there, or is that accurate to get the best price on a flight?
I have asked every airline and every booking platform about this, and I have gotten not a uniform answer for any of it. So what it boils down to is book something where there aren't going to be cancellation fees, and then keep monitoring it. And if the flights go down in price, even in points valuations, you can do this on award bookings too. If you find a cheaper deal, cancel your existing reservation and rebook. That's going to give you the most peace of mind. And that's probably the most definitive answer I can give you there, because I've seen some great deals on Tuesdays. I've seen it on Fridays. So I personally don't buy the whole, like, there's a magic date that you need to get a good deal on flights.
And I've seen good deals at the very last minute too. So sometimes what I've done, and I would recommend you do, is set up some Google alerts on that flight, and set up, alerts that when the flight drops or when it goes a certain price, you'll get an email and you'll get a note saying, hey, this price is below $1,000. This price is this much. And you'll be surprised. Sometimes I'll jump on that right away. And, even if you're not booking with points or miles, it's really important to pay attention to what Kamaron said, which is the cancellation fees. Sometimes I'll pay a little more to get the flight that is refundable, rather than saving, $40 to get the non-refundable one. And then I end up having an emergency and losing all of the money because I didn't want to pay an extra 40. So to me, it really does come down to being really strategic about the long-term, plan of your trip, and not thinking so short-minded about short-sighted about but this is $40 extra. But like in the grand scheme of your entire budget of your trip, what makes the most sense for you at the end of the day?
Absolutely. We have a question from the chat from Joy asking about what steps they should take when saving for a dream vacation. We've talked about a couple of different strategies and things, but they're wondering, should they have a separate savings account? Should they be contributing monthly, or be thinking more about kind of big chunks, like, get a tax refund, put that in your travel account, things like that, windfalls.
Yeah. I think you have to know yourself, really know what kind of personality you have when it comes to money. If you tend to burn through your cash and, find yourself frustrated that you never have enough saved for the things you need, even though you're putting aside money from your paycheck, then a certificate of deposit might be a good idea so that you can put some of the savings that you already have set aside in a locked savings account for a certain period of time, collect a slightly higher interest rate than you would at a traditional savings account. And then when you're ready to take that trip, you can go ahead and, that CD will unlock for you and give you access to that money back. If you don't want it to be locked up or frozen, and you want to go for maybe slightly even higher interest rates, then I would definitely recommend opening up a high yield savings account. The ones with the best rates right now tend to be 4.5% around there, and they tend to be online high yield savings accounts. So if you don't yet have an online bank or high yield savings account with an online bank, this might be the time to go ahead and open that up and name your savings account from the name of your dream trip. I had a friend who named her trip like Bikinis and Bellinis, and that was the name of her savings account, which I think is so funny. Every time she would log in, she would see Bikinis and Bellinis, and it motivated her to add more money to that high yield savings. So I think, you make it fun, make it playful, make it something that's going to motivate you to keep adding the money and hit your goals, but make sure you're getting a high yield as well, because a lot of traditional savings accounts offer very low interest rates.
Absolutely. I think that's a great tip. And you bring up CDs and other kind of investment vehicles. I guess how can people decide which is best, if they should, or is there a certain amount of time before their planned trip that they should definitely stick with like a savings account or something more liquid versus investing that money, helping it grow a little bit faster because you have that time?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think if it's a big trip, something like 5 years away or 7 years away, maybe it's a honeymoon trip that you're planning with your partner, that, could probably sit in the market and grow because you have a little bit more time. 5 to 7 years is significantly longer, and you have a bit more of a risk tolerance than if you were to open up an investment account for a trip that's a year away. Anything can happen in the markets in the next 12 months, and we don't know which direction it will take, versus a 7-year timeline. It's a bit more, predictable. So I do think that if it's short term, if it's coming up within the next 12 to 18 months, it should absolutely be in a high yield savings account, and you should avoid the markets because they're just too volatile. The market goes up and down all the time, and you really want to have a reliable indicator for how much money you're going to have when you look at that account as you're making your plans for your trip.
I also might add, again, coming from the points and miles perspective, we're a little bit more counterintuitive here because a lot of the programs frequently devalue. So don't hold on to it for that long if you're sitting on a stack of points and miles, because I can't tell you the number of stories I've heard of people who are just going to hold on to their points, waiting to save up for that dream vacation, and ultimately find out that, X airline has actually whittled away at what these have been worth for the last year or so. And so suddenly they have to save up even longer. So do not hoard your points and miles. Use them as soon as possible once you become like remotely close to that vacation, and use it for just a small part of the vacation versus thinking that you're going to use it for the entirety, because there's a high chance that those points aren't going to be worth what they were even a couple of months ago.
Yeah. I love that point, Kamaron. I did the mix and matching myself when I was in Japan. I did some trips or some stays that we did at like the traditional little hostels, or like the like the hotels that weren't really that expensive nightly rate, but the really nice ones that we wanted to stay at. Like Kyoto has a really nice Ace hotel that we wanted to check out, and we used our Chase points and stayed there with that. So it doesn't have to be use your points for everything. I think that was a really great point.
Yeah, and some folks just value certain things. I know some people prefer to have like a nicer flight on the way there. Some people prefer the nicer hotel. So use your points towards what is more important for you during that dream vacation.
Definitely.
Really great tips. And since we're on the topic of credit cards, especially thinking about your bigger financial picture and how credit cards and credit card debt can play into that and be really harmful for people, how do you kind of know when you're in a good place to use credit cards and get those rewards you're talking about, get the benefits that there are of traveling with a credit card or using credit card for travel purchases, versus somebody who maybe should probably stay away from that because they can easily rack up that debt and let it sit for too long, and then it's growing in interest and all these other things that can become problematic?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not worth accruing all these points if you're not able to pay off the credit card in a timely fashion, so you're not getting hit with that interest. So the points and miles game is not one worth playing if you are not able to stay on top of your monthly payments and keep that debt at a minimum. So first and foremost right there. But if you are able to do that and then go down that rabbit hole, it is so worth it, because a lot of these credit card companies then have transfer bonuses. So as you're racking up these points, if you're going through an Amex, a Chase, a Citi, a Capital One, those actually end up having a lot more value, because when you transfer to certain airlines or hotels, you'll see 30% bonuses, 50% bonuses. So be really smart, be very financially sound, and pay off your credit card bill every month, because there is a lot of savings to be had if you do that. But if you're not able to pay off your credit card bill, it is not worth it. The interest negates all of the benefits here.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And the only thing I would add to that, to what Kamaron said, is just the fact that you should really be paying attention to the factors of your credit score itself. And if you don't really know what those are before maxing out a credit card, take a look at what those factors are. One of the most important factors is your utilization rate, which is basically what percentage of the total credit available to you do you owe right now. And if your percentage is really high, if you have a utilization rate that's above 30%, or even getting 40, 50%, you're going to see a big dent in your credit score. So that's probably not the right time to now go ahead and start charging dream vacation expenses on top of the utilization that you already have on that card. So really pay attention to your utilization in your 5 factors of your credit score. And again, you really want to have it be super low. Ideally, what Kamaron said, where you're paying all of your monthly statements in full on time by your due date to avoid interest fees, to keep your credit in good standing. But especially that utilization, if you have high utilization right now and you're not able to bring it down to less than 10%, then it's probably not the right time to start adding additional charges.
Absolutely. Great advice. Jerry from the chat would like to know, what is the best website, or maybe a few different websites you can recommend to assist with using your points, getting the most out of your points?
I mean, obviously, I'm going to say thepointsguy.com, because we actually have a calculator that you can use. You can plug in what airfare is with cash, what your hotel rates are with cash versus points, and it'll let you know like which is the better way to go about. If it makes more sense to use cash, more sense to use points in that scenario. But we're also noticing that Google flights and hotels, they're also showing a lot of smart award availability. So that's one that's not my employer.
Yeah, I mean, I take a lot of time to just look on blogs and look at people's travel experiences, right? The different travel bloggers that I check out. And then when I want to go and compare credit cards or look to see which one is the best for my trip or for points, I actually look at Forbes. They do have quite a good long blog comparison. And sometimes if you just look at some of the different experiences that people post online about what they actually got, what value they got from their trip, if it's the same place you're going, that I find to be really helpful. I mean, I probably read 10 individual bloggers, different stories of their trips to Japan, what they regretted, where they, redeemed points that was worth it, where they were underwhelmed. And then I, took my own notes from that. What do I want to take? So definitely look at travel bloggers and look at different sites that compare and contrast credit cards. CNBC obviously has lots of different great articles that feature how different millennials are spending their money on trips or different entrepreneurial ventures. So just go online and make sure that you're really looking and at reputable sources as well, because you could go on a bunch of TikTokers and Instagram stories and see a bunch of stuff that people are posting. But when it comes from a reputable source and they've verified that information, that it's trustworthy.
The other one too, because I'll let you know how I booked my own honeymoon, is point.me. There are a couple of booking platforms that are also showing up where you do pay like a certain a small fee for like a 1-day use or a 2-day use, but it'll say like it'll give you a bunch of different credit cards and show like these are how many points you would need to transfer over. This is also good if you're new to the whole concept of like transfer points. Walks you through it. It made it super easy. It was the first time I had ever done it, so it's been an invaluable tool for certain travel.
Absolutely. I love that advice. And another question on that, is it up to personal preference, or is there a better credit card for, losing my train of thought, specific hotels and chains or airlines, or a more generic, general Capital One or Discover, or just a credit card, or more generic credit card when people are trying to build up points, earn those rewards and things?
We really like kind of just the generic ones. And I mean, there are a million to choose from. And I know we only have so much time. Do research. Some are better for if you're dining out a bunch, you can rack out more points using certain types of credit cards. If you're traveling a bunch, certain ones offer like more points values for that. So we do prefer, though, if you do like an Amex, a Chase, a Citi, just so then you can have a little bit more leeway in transferring those points into your given loyalty program. So you're not just locked into, say, one co-branded credit card, but the co-branded credit cards, also have plenty of benefit too. But if you're just looking for maybe a little bit more options, go one of the more generic route.
Yeah. And also ask yourself, is this something that's just a short-term quick trip that you're going to get from this card and a very specific short-term goal, or is it something that's going to be a longer-term ongoing basis that you're going to use? Because a lot of people do, like, they churn over, they'll go like, I'm going to use this, I'm just going to do this really big honeymoon trip, and then we're not going to use that card really very much anymore because we're going to switch our strategy up and go focus on these points over here. For my personal use of credit cards, I have some that I will use from time to time, and then I have my 1 or 2 big cards that I really put everything on because I want to get the maximum out of those rewards because they're the ones that tend to be most flexible for me. One of them is a Chase card because in the Chase portal, you can either use it for, Hyatt has really great Chase to Hyatt transfers are really good. If you like Hyatt hotels, or if you're a Marriott person, it's going to be a little different. So if you're not really loyal to a specific brand or something like that, I would agree with Kamaron to do the bigger, larger bank credit cards. But do keep in mind, is this something that you're going to continue to use beyond this trip, this dream vacation, or is it something where you're being really strategic and it's a short-term goal?
Absolutely. Excellent advice. And we have to wrap up here today, but thank you so much to Yanely and Kamaron for joining me and sharing such great expert tips with our audience. I hope everyone here is able to take something with them and book their next vacation a little bit more confidently.